Hello, and welcome to the Community Forum presented by the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council. My name is Kevin Nerney. I'm the Executive Director of the Council and host of this show. And our goal today is to bring you news, information, and insight into topics that are important to people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. Today, our topic is supported decision-making, which is a new way for people to protect their rights and autonomy. Today, our guests are Kate Sherlock, Andrew McQuaide, and Susan Birch, who are all members of a much larger coalition to encourage supported decision-making in the state of Rhode Island. And I'll let them introduce themselves. Kate, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. Hello, my name is Kate Sherlock. I'm a Rhode Island attorney since 1985, and I'm currently a consultant for the Regional Resource Center at the Sargent Center. And in addition to participating in the Supported Decision-Making Coalition, we are trying otherwise to get the word out about supported decision-making through trainings. And we are planning to host a website, which I hope you will all visit, which will be at rhodeislanddecisionmaking.org, hopefully later this year.
Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew McQuaide. I am the Individual and Family Supports Coordinator at the Paul V. Sherlock Center on Disabilities at Rhode Island College. Joined the disability community first and foremost as a sibling. I'm the sibling to two Rhode Islanders with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but professionally started in the field as a direct support professional supporting Rhode Islanders with disabilities when I turned 18, and since then have worked with the state of Rhode Island, the Division of Developmental Disabilities, supporting disability policy. I've also worked in the provider space, and thrilled to join the coalition on advancing supportive decision-making.
Great. And Susan?
My name is Susan Birch. I'm in the A.
Advocates in Action.
You've also been a part of this coalition
around
supported decision-making, correct? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get at it. And I guess the first question is, what is supported decision-making?
Supported decision-making is a way for individuals with disabilities to get the help that they need and want with the decision-making process. They appoint a person or persons to be their supporters, and their supporters can help them to gather information, review information, understand the information, and express a decision. It's not limited to that, but that is the basics. The main point is that the individual with disabilities makes their own decision with that support.
Great. So what makes supported decision-making different from just asking other people for help in your kind of daily life?
Well, people everywhere can ask for help, and that's using supported decision-making informally. People with disabilities can use it as a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. In Rhode Island, we have the Supported Decision-Making Act that passed in 2019. So we have a law, and because we have a law, it's legally recognized and legally enforceable.
Great. So in Rhode Island, it has to be recognized by various organizations, that kind of thing. But you mentioned that it could also be an accommodation under the ADA. Mm-hmm. How would that work, and would that be available to people in other states? That
would be available in all of America because everyone has the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the way that would work would be that, say someone with a disability went to the bank and they wanted to open an account, and the people at the bank were nervous about whether they understood what was going on with that account. And so they could use supported decision-making informally, well, as an accommodation by asking the bank to accommodate them to let their supporters participate in the process of helping them figure out what opening this account entailed, and then maybe even expressing that decision, but the person with the disability could express the decision too. And the bank should accommodate people that way, as should physicians and other people who accept decisions.
So it sounds to me like the difference then between it being an accommodation in some states and it being in the law in Rhode Island is that it has to be recognized in Rhode Island?
Yes.
if you utilize it. You mentioned people with disabilities as well, and I know we're the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council, so that's obviously our focus. Can other people with disabilities utilize supported decision making?
Absolutely. Elders with disabilities that were not developmental can use it. Individuals with mental illness, individuals with traumatic brain injury, anybody with a disability can use supported decision making.
Great. And Kate, you had mentioned banks, but are there other organizations, other entities that should recognize this? And
Yeah. So as you think about all the different sort of organizations that we interface with throughout daily life, all of those organizations would need to recognize supported decision making. And so, of course, healthcare is a big segment. So healthcare institutions, banking, but then there's any variety of financial institutions that you might engage with. So wealth management, so the variety of financial institutions. Of course, there's housing. So if you're working with a housing authority, education and school systems and colleges, and education is particularly important because students with disabilities can utilize supported decision making, and then many individuals with disabilities access a variety of support agencies, and so those support agencies also would need to recognize supported decision making.
Okay. Well, it sounds good. Susan, why is supported decision making a good thing?
To help people.
Sure, it can help people. What's the big thing about supported decision making that you've talked about before that allows you to do what?
Who gets to make the decisions when in supported decision making?
Me.
Right, with some assistance. That's fantastic. And I'm wondering, what kind of real life situations, what kind of decisions could use this process to help you out? And Susan, I know you had a story about a time where you needed some help making a decision.
Oh yeah, because I want to move out, and then I did pick up the paper, and I give it to my brother, and I got my own place.
So where were you living prior to your brother giving you some help?
Oh, I live with my mom downstairs with my sister.
Okay, and you said you got some help from your brother?
Yeah.
And what did your brother help you do?
To get a new place.
So you got a new place and you're living in the new place now?
Yep.
And you're happy now?
Very happy.
Oh, that's fantastic. What are some other kind of real life decisions that you could utilize this for?
Well, I mentioned education before, and it was just a few months ago that a lot of students were making those really difficult decisions as to what are they going to do once they graduate high school. And I have a member of my extended family just a few years ago who was in that same situation, and was looking at a great university that he had gotten into, but was looking at all those alternatives, community colleges, work, and so he used a version of supported decision making by sort of bringing together the people who were important to him, who he trusted, whose opinion he valued, and really consulted with them. And it didn't mean that we all gave the exact same advice, but allowed him to think about his decision from a variety of lens and points of view. From there, he was able to make his own decision. But what I thought was also really powerful was that then he revisits that decision regularly, and that's not uncommon regardless of whether or not you have a disability, to say, ooh, is this still a good fit for me? And so we have that conversation almost, it seems like, every semester about whether or not this is still a good fit. So I think education is a great space where folks are utilizing supported decision making. And as you think about all those decisions that students make as they're thinking about what they're going to do after they graduate high school, that's also for people with disabilities a time when they are also looking at guardianship. So 18 is often a time where students and families are looking at guardianship. And so knowing that supported decision making is an alternative becomes really a really great tool in people's toolboxes. The other thing that I think is important to think about as we think about students who are transitioning to post-school life as well is that it's also a really natural time to think about how it is that someone's going to keep their network once they've graduated school, and think about who are the people who are important in my life and who are going to be able to help me as I sort of venture into this next part of my life.
So there's some kind of relationship building that's a natural part of this process?
Absolutely. Thinking about who are the folks who are going to support me in making decisions really has you think about who are those relationships that I have. Do almost a little bit of relationship mapping, if you will, to think about who are those folks. And not everyone that you have a relationship with is going to be the same person that you want to support you in making decisions. And I know I go to different family members for different decisions, right? Someone who I go to for our car advice is not the same person I'm going to maybe for financial advice. But thinking about who are those people, and again, I think as you think about students who are preparing to transition to post-school life, that's a really great opportunity to think about, and who are those folks who I'm going to continue, who are going to continue with me as I sort of create my next adventure.
Right, it's great. So you brought up relationships, and you know, I'm an attorney as well, and I've handled a lot of legal matters. Relationships are always kind of tricky. Susan, you mentioned that you kind of went through this process. You had one sister that you were living with that didn't want you to move out, and you got help from a brother that did want to help you move out. How's your relationship with both your brother and your sister now?
Very well.
Oh, good. Great. So this is something that can, as Andrew was saying, kind of help build these relationships and foster them long term. One really interesting thing you brought up was the guardianship piece for kids who are turning 18. I've seen it myself often where as they're in the school process, there are professional people saying, well, you better get guardianship, otherwise you know, something terrible is going to happen. And you know, we talked about what supported decision making is. Maybe we should talk a little bit about what guardianship is. So, Kate, you're an attorney. Would you mind talking a little bit about what guardianship is in Rhode Island?
Well, in Rhode Island, the cities and towns all have their own probate courts, and it's the probate courts that have jurisdiction over guardianship. And if someone wants to become someone's guardian, they need to provide clinical evidence, generally from the primary care physician of the person, that the person lacks decision-making capacity. And then they have to explore alternatives to guardianship by law and rule them out before they file for the guardianship. So the court will be looking at the capacity and whether alternatives can be used. And if they appoint a guardian, it should only be for those decisions that the person both can't make and doesn't have alternatives to help with. But that doesn't always happen. But the thing about guardianship that is so different from supported decision making is that when someone gets a limited guardian or guardian to make some or all of their decisions, they don't get to make them themselves anymore. And with supported decision making, people get support, but they get to make the decision themselves. There are also some requirements for guardians. Once somebody becomes a guardian, they have to file an annual status report, which reports on the decisions they've made on behalf of the person and the basis for those decisions and the outcome, in addition to filing an annual accounting. And generally people do hire counsel, although it's not required. They are required to meet the requirements of the law. And so it can be a little bit costly, whereas supported decision making doesn't have to have a cost at all. It's not that people can't go to a lawyer, but they don't have to.
Great. So you brought up some monetary costs, and just to circle back to Susan and Andrew, what you were talking about with relationships, just in my own practice, I've seen multiple times where, say, parents want to get guardianship over an adult child, and the other siblings, for instance, disagree. And so it causes a rift in the family. I'll tell you one thing I've actually seen multiple times is that two either divorcing or already divorced parents file for guardianship over an adult child. And it's really not that they believe that they need to do that. It's that it's kind of a continuation of the divorce. I've also seen a lot of families just split on the decision because I'm a parent, right? What do all parents put first and foremost is safety. And that's the big thing. So we want to make sure people are safe. And so oftentimes people go to the first and what they think is the best thing that they can do to ensure safety. And that's where we see the rift in relationships, because other family members, especially I notice siblings, it's like, well, wait a second, there's some dignity in being able to make decisions, even bad decisions, on your own. So that's a non-monetary cost, relationship cost, to potentially getting guardianship. Kate, you mentioned some alternatives to guardianship as well. So supported decision-making obviously is one of those alternatives. What are some other alternatives to guardianship?
Well, I want to start with that supported decision-making can be used to help people explore alternatives as well. So if somebody is using supported decision-making, they need to be able to express their decision. The expression doesn't have to be verbal, but they need to be able to say what they want. And like everybody, they could someday be in a position where they can no longer say what they want. So it's a good idea to use supported decision-making to plan for that time when maybe they can't. And hopefully they always can, but maybe they can't. So some of the alternatives in Rhode Island, we break guardianship down into 4 areas of decision-making, and the 2 major ones are healthcare and finances. And so we have alternatives to healthcare. Like a lot of places, we have some advanced directives, like a living will, where somebody can say what they want to happen to them. Should they find themselves having a terminal illness, they can say in advance whether they want life-sustaining treatment or not at that time. They can also fill out a durable power of attorney for healthcare, which springs into effect when they can't make a decision, and they have a choice about who they choose to be their agent to make their decisions. And the agent, unlike guardianship, where the guardian has to decide what's best for someone, the agent under a durable power of attorney for healthcare tries to make the decision that the person would make for themselves. So if I were Andrew's agent and he had a healthcare decision that he could not make, I wouldn't be trying to say what's best for Andrew. I would be trying to say, what would Andrew decide if he were making this decision for himself? Whereas supported decision-making would be, Andrew, what do you want? What kind of information do you think you need to make this decision? What kind of help do you want from me to go through that process of gathering the information, reviewing the information, understanding it, and saying what you want, reviewing alternatives to it, because sometimes you don't have to do what the doctors recommend. You could do something more holistic, things like that. And then with finances, there are many, many alternatives, such as joint bank accounts, trusts. There are also powers of attorney for finances. There are ABLE accounts, which I'll let Kevin speak to.
Oh, I love ABLE accounts. Nobody likes ABLE accounts more than I do, but that's a whole nother show. I'll promise to do one in the future.
Oh, right. And then the other thing that can be a possible alternative is technology, and I'll let Andrew talk about technology as an alternative to guardianship.
Absolutely. Kevin, you mentioned that for many parents and for many families, it is about sort of that idea of safety. And it's sort of a misnomer to think that guardianship equals safety. And particularly when we know that there's so much new technology, off-the-shelf technology, that individuals can utilize to be more independent, to be supported to be independent. And this is also true for elders. There's a variety of ways that folks are utilizing technology. So increasingly folks are creating smart homes where individuals can remotely lock or even see what's happening around the perimeter of a home. Yeah. There's great medication dispensers that time and prompt individuals. My biggest form of assistive technology, right, is my cell phone, but I don't go around calling it assistive technology, but it told me where to be today, how to get there, and so there's a lot of ways that technology can support individuals to be more independent, independent, but also to have the support that they need to be independent. And that then allows for individuals to feel more secure without necessarily needing to compromise someone's sort of autonomy or civil rights. I think I know I keep mentioning education, but I think one thing that's, really important in the education space is oftentimes, and Kevin, I learned this from you, right, is that oftentimes, families are concerned about their ability to continue to be engaged in a student's IEP process and are told, well, without guardianship, but really it may be something as simple as a release that allows a family to continue to stay engaged with someone's education past the point that they turn 18.
Yeah, that's a great point. Again, not to always go back to my practice when I was practicing, but I often found that that's really all parents wanted, was they wanted to still get information. So those releases, and you can get it for financial, you can get it for healthcare, you can get it for education, obviously, and that usually gives the parents and the adult, soon-to-be adult child, actually wants the parents to continue to get that information anyway. So they've got no problem signing those releases. So that's a great point. I have to say it's absolutely amazing what you brought up about using supported decision-making to future plan. It's not something I had considered before, but not only can you use it to avoid guardianship now, you can use it to put things in place for later on. That's a fantastic thought. So you guys have me sold. I want to use supported decision-making. What now? What do I do now? How do I do it?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different things that folks can do if they're listening to this and are interested. I think there's a few things. One is kind of going back to those relationships, thinking about who are the people in your life who you would go to or already are going to likely to help you in making decisions. Who are those supporters? The other thing that someone might want to think about are the types of decisions that you may need support with, because there are some decisions that we'll all make on our own and won't need any support. There are other decisions, though, that we are all naturally going to others. And so thinking about those types of decisions. And then I think the sort of third thing that I think of is sort of very pragmatically, going through the process. And I'm sure, Kate or others can speak a little bit more in detail, but I know, Kate mentioned before that we're all part of a supported decision-making coalition. Certainly reaching out to the coalition to better understand the ins and outs of the process. Of course, we'd be happy to be helpful to anyone who's seeking guidance. So, kind of identifying the people that you want to be the supporters, making sure they're on board as well. Obviously, this is all an agreement. Figuring out the issues that you want to make decisions on, and then what's the kind of the physical process you'd have to go through?
So then according to the Rhode Island statute, there's a supported decision-making agreement that you enter. There's a form in the statute. You don't have to use that form, but if you use your own form, it has to include the elements that are in that form. And the form is pretty simple. You put in your name, you tick off boxes for what kinds of decisions you want help with, you provide the names of your supporter or supporters. We all recommend a team. We've talked about who helps us, who's in our world. And we think a team is good. We think a team makes people more safe, but we also think that a team approach gives us more information, and also you've got a team. So if something happens to one of your people, you don't have to start all over from scratch. You can find another team member, but you've still got some people that are helping you. And everybody has to sign the agreement. So the person who's appointing people to help signs the agreement, but also the people who've agreed to support. So if I'm doing the agreement, I have to sign it and say, I'm appointing Susan and Andrew and Kevin, but Susan and Andrew and Kevin will have to sign too, saying that they've agreed to be my supporters and that they understand that I get to still make the decisions, that they are just helping with the process. And it has to be witnessed by 2 witnesses or a notary public as well. And then after you've signed it, you have to think about who you might want to share it with. Do you want to give a copy to your school? Do you want to give a copy to your primary care physician? Do you want to give a copy to your bank? You know, those kinds of things. You think about who you want to share it with so that they know in advance. But you can always share it at the time. But it's good to have some copies of it. And then you have to think about how is it going to work for you. So I have all you as my supporters. Well, how often are we going to get together to talk about decisions? Is it going to be when I have a big decision and I call you up? Or do I need you to call me up every once in a while and check on me? Are we going to meet in person? Or now that we've all been through the pandemic, are we going to meet by Zoom? Where are we going to meet? You have to think about those kinds of practical things. Andrew mentioned his family member who revisits every 6 months. That's about that particular decision. So other decisions you might need to revisit more often, and some people might need to meet less often. It depends. So those are things to think about.
Great. So it's something really important that you brought up is building teams, and we mentioned teams of support before. You know, in my experience, I believe the data backs this up, that the number one predictor of abuse and neglect is isolation. And so the more people you have involved in your life, the less likely there is to be that kind of abuse and neglect. So that's a great point. I do want to, just in case anyone's interested, because it is in a statute, and so if you want to go to the statute and you can fill out that form, or again, as Kate mentioned, you can fill out your own form. But that statute is Rhode Island General Law 42-66.13. That's the supported decision-making law in Rhode Island, so you can go there to check that out.
And can I point out one more thing?
Of course.
Well, actually, it's two more things. So in the law, it talks about who is eligible to be supporters, and there are some exclusions that you would think about, people with a conflict of interest or people who might have gotten in trouble for abusing or neglecting you. And there's also some limitations on who can witness the document, and that includes the conflict of interest people, but also people who don't understand the form of communication that the person is using, unless there's someone there who does.
Okay, great. So thank you all for the information. So my understanding is supported decision-making can be used in a variety of situations. It's very flexible. It can be for something very small. It could be for something very big. It helps build the decision-making capabilities, so people get to experience decision-making and get better at decision-making. It builds networks of support, which, as we just mentioned, can be really important. It's legally recognized and enforceable in Rhode Island and in other states, even if they don't have a statute under the ADA, potentially. It protects civil rights, right? Guardianship, the statute in Rhode Island specifically says, we understand that giving guardianship, it takes away somebody's civil rights. So this is a fantastic new tool to be used in Rhode Island. I want to thank you all so much for coming out and giving us the information today. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye.